When Elara gave her last $20 to a lost old woman for a cab, she thought she was just doing a good deed. She never imagined that the very next day a ruthless billionaire would turn up at her job, not to reward her, but to publicly fire her for the one act of kindness that left her broke. Before we start the story, your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can meet again. The polished marble floor of the Onyx Towers Hotel reflected the lobby's grand chandelier, 1,000 points of light that did nothing to warm the cool evening. Elara Vance, her concierge uniform immaculate, maintained a flawless smile. "Of course, sir. I will ensure your theater tickets are hand-delivered to your suite within the hour." The guest huffed, clearly unimpressed, but finally moved on. The clock read 9 p.m. Elara let her smile droop for half a second, the mask of professional calm falling away. Her hand strayed beneath the heavy granite desk to a simple notepad where a pencil sketch was taking shape. It wasn't a doodle, it was a complex architectural joint, a load-bearing concept for a cantilevered truss that had been bothering her for days. It was a ghost of her former life, a life before the Onyx, a life when she built things larger than a guest's itinerary. She was solving a problem of physics and design, all while a $1,000 suit complained about the temperature of his bottled water. A shadow fell over her desk. "Miss Vance." Elara's hand snapped back into view, the notepad disappearing into her lap. Mr. Finch, the hotel manager, loomed beside her. He was a man who seemed perpetually starched, his gaze as cold and hard as the lobby floor. He didn't look at Elara, he inspected her, his eyes cataloguing any potential flaw. "We have discussed the no personal effects policy at the concierge desk, have we not? Your drawings are a distraction from the impeccable service our guests expect." His voice was a low hiss. "It won't happen again, Mr. Finch," Elara said, her own voice a perfect blend of apology and deference. He sniffed, unconvinced, and continued his silent, judgmental patrol toward the grand entrance. Elara exhaled, her frustration a tight knot in her chest. She was just replacing her professional smile when the heavy glass doors glided open, admitting not a guest, but a gust of chilly night air and a small, elderly woman. She was wrapped in a simple cloth coat, not the mink and cashmere that usually graced the Onyx. She looked utterly lost, her eyes wide with distress as she clutched a worn, black handbag to her chest. She took 2 steps onto the marble, stopped, and turned in a slow, confused circle, completely disoriented by the scale and opulence of the lobby. She was a sparrow that had wandered into a dragon's lair. Mr. Finch, seeing the woman, began to march back, his face already a mask of pure disapproval, clearly intending to have her removed. But Elara was faster. She moved from behind her desk in a single, fluid motion, intercepting the woman before her manager could. She gently touched the woman's arm. The woman flinched, startled. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Elara's voice was soft, dropping the professional concierge tone for one of genuine human concern. The woman's face crumpled in relief. "Can I get you some water?" Elara asked, already guiding her toward a plush velvet chair tucked away in a quiet alcove, away from the judging eyes of Mr. Finch and the lobby's wealthy patrons. "I'm all right," Beatrice murmured, her voice trembling as Elara guided her into the plush velvet chair. She clutched her worn handbag as if it were a life raft. I was supposed to meet my son. It's his birthday, you see. But my taxi, he dropped me at the corner and drove off so quickly. I didn't realize until just now." Her hands, frail and dotted with age spots, fluttered from her coat pockets to her bag, fumbling with the clasp. She opened it, and her face went pale. "Oh dear, oh my heavens, it's gone." She frantically rummaged inside, her movements becoming more desperate. "My wallet, It's not here. I must have left it in the cab. I'm so foolish. Tears of genuine panic welled in her eyes. I don't have a thing on me. My phone, my money, it's all gone. I just need cab fare to get home. I can't even remember my son's number to call him. Ilara's heart ached with a familiar pang of empathy. She knew what it was like to be stranded, to feel that hot rush of shame and fear. She glanced instinctively toward the manager's office. Mr. Finch was a dark silhouette behind the glass, his attention fixed on them like a hawk. Hotel policy was clear: do not engage with vagrants, call security. But Ilara couldn't see a vagrant. She just saw a scared woman who reminded her of her grandmother. Discreetly, Ilara reached for her own purse, tucked on a small shelf beneath the concierge desk's alcove. She pulled it into her lap, out of Mr. Finch's direct line of sight, and opened it. Her gaze fell on the single, folded $20 bill. It was all she had. It was her bus fare and her grocery money, the only thing standing between her and a 4-day fast until her next paycheck. A second of agonizing calculation flashed through her mind: 4 days of rice and water. She looked at Beatrice's tear-streaked face. The calculation was over. She palmed the bill, her movements swift and practiced, and leaned in close to the old woman. "It's not much," Ilara whispered, pressing the folded bill into Beatrice's cold, trembling hand. "But please, take this. Get home safe." The woman's fingers closed around it. Ilara tucked her own purse away, her heart a little lighter and her wallet completely empty. From the glass-walled sanctum of his office, Mr. Finch witnessed the entire exchange. He didn't see the whispers, only the actions. He saw his troublesome concierge, the one who doodled on the job, lean in conspiratorially. He saw her hand move. He saw money pass between them. The angle was obscured, but the fact was not. Ilara Vance was conducting a financial transaction with a non-guest, a disheveled old woman, in his lobby. He scowled. She was either soliciting, or worse, taking a tip for services she was about to render, like calling a cab. It was unprofessional, a clear violation, and exactly the kind of behavior he expected from her. He had her now. Back in the alcove, Beatrice stared at the $20, her jaw quivering. "Oh dear, I can't. This is your money. Please." Ilara insisted gently. "I want to. Just get home safe." Beatrice clutched Ilara's hand, the bill pressed between them. "Thank you, dear. You're a lifesaver." "You truly are. What is your name?" "Ilara," she replied, her professional mask melting into a genuine warm smile. "My name is Ilara. Now, let me get you that cab. I'll walk you out myself." Ilara held the cab door, ensuring Beatrice was settled safely inside. "Thank you again, Ilara." The woman's voice wafted out. "Just get home safe," Ilara replied, her smile genuine. As the yellow cab pulled into the stream of city lights, a long, impossibly black sedan glided to the curb. It was a silent shark in a sea of minnows. A man in a suit so expensive it looked like liquid shadow stepped out. He was tall, with perfectly styled dark hair, and a face Ilara knew better than her own, a face that haunted her nightmares: Gideon Croft. He froze, his hand still on the polished car door, his eyes locked on Ilara's back as she turned from the curb. His expression, for one split second, was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Ilara, oblivious, brushed her hands on her uniform and re-entered the Onyx's revolving doors, her mind already shifting back to her duties, her gaze lowered. Gideon watched her disappear inside. The shock on his face melted, replaced by something hard and familiar, a cold, sharp calculation. He smoothed his $1,000 tie, his gaze fixed on the door Ilara had passed through. A slow, thin smile touched his lips. This was an opportunity. He followed her inside. He found Mr. Finch instantly, the manager hovering near the main desk like a vulture. "Mr. Finch?" Gideon extended a hand. "Gideon Croft. I'm here for the 9:30 meeting with Mr. Thorne." Finch, instantly deferential to the name and the suit, shook his hand. "Mr. Croft, a pleasure. We have the conference room ready." As Finch gestured, Gideon paused, glancing toward Alara's desk. "A quick word, if I may," Gideon said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "That concierge, Alara Vance." He leaned in slightly. "I've had issues with her in the past. Professional issues. She's not stable. I'd be careful." Mr. Finch's eyes lit with vindictive understanding. "I see. Thank you for the warning, sir." An hour later, Alara's shift ended. The long walk home felt colder, the wind biting through her thin coat. She pulled out her wallet, opening it to confirm the empty space where the 20 had been. A familiar anxiety fluttered in her stomach. Payday was 4 days away. But then she pictured Beatrice's face, the relief when she'd gotten in the cab. She was worried, but she wasn't sorry. The next morning, Alara arrived for her 8 a.m. shift, smoothing the front of her freshly pressed uniform. She prided herself on being punctual, on being perfect, despite the gnawing anxiety of her empty wallet. But the moment she stepped into the Onyx Towers, she knew something was wrong. The usual hushed morning calm was gone, replaced by a tense, crackling energy. The lobby was buzzing, not with guests, but with staff, who huddled in small, nervous groups before scattering. And at the center of it all, at her concierge desk, stood a man who was clearly the source of the storm. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to suck all the air out of the grand space. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but unlike Gideon's fashionable polish, this was pure, unadulterated power. He was radiating a palpable fury. This was Julian Thorne. Alara didn't need to be told. She had seen his picture in magazines, the billionaire maverick who owned this hotel, this block, this city, and he was furious. Flanking him, looking pale and obsequious, were Mr. Finch and Gideon Croft. Alara's stomach turned to ice. Gideon. He was still here. Mr. Finch was speaking in a low, panicked tone, his hands shaking as he held a tablet. He was pointing at the screen, showing it to the billionaire. "You see, Mr. Thorne? Just as I said. Clear as day. The timestamp is right there." Gideon stood beside them, his arms crossed, a mask of concerned professionalism. "It's appalling, Julian, truly. I was shocked when I saw it. To take advantage of someone like that." Alara's footsteps faltered on the marble. She had to get to her desk, but it meant walking straight into the lion's den. She took a breath, held her head high, and continued her path. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm here for—" She never finished the sentence. The moment she approached, Julian Thorne's head snapped in her direction. His eyes, a cold, piercing gray, locked onto her. The buzzing in the lobby stopped. Every staff member held their breath. "You," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the vast space like a shard of ice. "Alara Vance." He didn't ask. It was a statement, an indictment. Alara froze, her professional smile dying on her lips. "Yes, sir. Mr. Thorne. Can I help?" "You can't." He interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet level. "But you can answer for this." He gestured vaguely to the tablet Finch was still holding, which Alara now recognized was playing grainy security footage of her and Beatrice. "Mr. Finch and my associate Mr. Croft have been informing me of your unprofessional conduct last night." Alara's mind raced. The sketch? The cab? What had she done? I don't understand, sir. Conduct? Don't you?" Julian took a step toward her, his sheer presence forcing her to stand her ground. "I'm told you were seen soliciting money, taking money from a vulnerable, elderly woman right here in my lobby. Elara's blood ran cold. The accusation was so vile, so completely backward, it stole her breath. What? She stammered, her gaze bouncing from Julian's stone-cold face to Gideon's mask of false concern. No, I would never. I didn't take anything. I gave her money. She was lost. She said her wallet was stolen. Gideon let out a short, pitying laugh, shaking his head as if pained. A classic deflection, Julian. A sad, paranoid narrative. She used to pull this in my firm, too, when her accounting was questioned. She's very unstable. Elara's head snapped toward him, betrayal and fury warring with her shock. You know that's not true, Gideon. Julian Thorne held up a hand, silencing her. His patience was clearly gone. I don't care what the story is. He snarled, his voice dangerously low, a command that echoed in the sudden silence of the lobby. I own this hotel. I own this brand. My mother, my real mother, is on the board of directors. And I will not have my staff, my reputation, tainted by exploiting the elderly in my lobby. It doesn't matter if you took it or gave it, it's unprofessional conduct with a non-guest. You're fired. He turned to Mr. Finch. Have security escort her out. The words "you're fired" hit Elara like a physical blow. She staggered back, the humiliation burning hot in her cheeks. This was it. Her last paycheck. She was going to be homeless. All for $20. All because Gideon was here. But sir, please. Now, Julian commanded, turning his back on her as if she no longer existed. Elara was about to turn, defeated, the floor seeming to drop out from under her, when a new voice cut through the lobby. It was sharp, aristocratic, and dripped with absolute authority. Julian, what is the meaning of this? Elara turned. Beatrice, the old woman from last night, was striding toward them. But this was not the lost, scared woman. She was dressed in an impeccable Chanel suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a look of thunder on her face. She looked every inch the billionaire's mother. Julian's entire demeanor shattered. His fury vanished, replaced by complete, dumbfounded shock. Mother? He stammered, his voice cracking slightly. What, you were, that was you. Yes, Julian, Beatrice Thorne said, her voice ringing with a cold fury that matched his own. She didn't stop at her son. She strode right past him, a queen reclaiming her court, coming to a halt directly beside Elara. She placed a protective, gloved hand on Elara's trembling arm. Elara looked up, stunned into silence. And this young woman, Beatrice announced, her voice projecting to every corner of the stunned lobby, did not take my money. She shot a withering glare at Gideon, then at her son. She gave me her money. She gave me her last $20 when I was lost, scared, and my wallet had been stolen. She squeezed Elara's arm, a gesture of absolute solidarity. This young woman didn't exploit me, Julian. She saved me. Julian Thorne's face, a mask of cold certainty just moments before, completely shattered, the blood drained from it. He looked at his mother, the formidable matriarch in the Chanel suit, and then at the grainy security footage on the tablet. He wasn't seeing an employee exploiting a vagrant. He was seeing his mother, and a concierge sacrificing her last dollar for her. His gaze swiveled to Mr. Finch, who had gone from pale to a ghastly, translucent white. Finch opened his mouth, a small "buh" sound escaping. Julian's stare then moved, slowly, dangerously, to Gideon, who was no longer smirking but looked suddenly cornered. The calculation in Julian's eyes was instantaneous and brutal. He turned back to the manager. "Get your things," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm and final. "You're fired." Mr. Finch looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Sir, I was misinformed," Mr. Croft said. "Now," Julian commanded, the single word ending the man's career. Finch scrambled away, a broken man dissolving into the background. Julian then turned to the person he had wronged, the woman he had publicly humiliated. His entire demeanor shifted. The billionaire, the titan of industry, looked profoundly ashamed. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice rough with a genuine, unpracticed apology. I apologize, profusely. What I said, what I assumed, it was inexcusable." His eyes then found Gideon Croft, who was already inching toward the exit, trying to fade into the chaos. "And you," Julian's voice hardened again, suspicion replacing shame, his gaze sharpening. "You backed this story. You confirmed it." Gideon froze, immediately putting on his most charming, reasonable face. "Julian, hold on," Gideon said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I was just going on what the manager said. The security footage looked bad. It was a simple misunderstanding. How was I to know it was your mother? A terrible coincidence, that's all." Julian ignored Gideon's flimsy excuse, his mind clearly working, reassessing the entire morning. The lobby was silent, watching. As Elara finally let out the breath she'd been holding, her trembling hand brushed against her uniform pocket. A folded napkin fell to the marble floor, landing by Julian's shoe. It was the sketch from last night. Before she could retrieve it, Julian bent down and picked it up. He unfolded it. His brow furrowed, the last traces of his anger evaporating, replaced by a sharp, analytical intrigue. He looked from the complex drawing to Elara, truly seeing her for the first time. "Miss Vance," he said, his tone entirely different. "My office. Now." The penthouse office was a stark, stunning space of glass and steel, overlooking the city. Beatrice sat quietly on a leather sofa, watching her son. Julian laid the small napkin on his massive glass desk. "This isn't a doodle," he stated, his finger tracing the lines. "This is a detailed structural concept, a load-bearing solution for a cantilevered truss system, the kind of thing that gives engineers nightmares." He looked up, his gray eyes intense. "Where did you study?" Elara's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She glanced at Beatrice, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. I was an architect," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I studied at Bartlett. My focus was structural innovation." Julian leaned forward. "Was? Who did you work for?" Elara swallowed the name like ash in her mouth. "Ethelred Croft," she said. It was my firm. Gideon Croft was my partner." The name hung in the air. Julian Thorne went utterly still, his face becoming an unreadable mask. He stared at Elara, the connection clicking into place with audible, terrifying finality. "Gideon Croft," he said slowly, "is the lead architect for my new flagship, Project Aegis, the biggest development in this city's history." The revelation hung in the air, a sickening, impossible truth. Project Aegis, the most ambitious architectural project of the decade. And Gideon, the man who had destroyed her, was at its helm. Elara suddenly understood. It wasn't a coincidence. Gideon was at the hotel. He wasn't just there to warn Finch. He was there to sign the final contracts with Julian, to seal the deal on the greatest theft of his life. Elara felt the blood drain from her face, but it was replaced by a sudden hot rush of adrenaline. 2 years of silence, 2 years of shame, of hiding, of sketching her dreams on napkins. It all broke open. "He's using my designs," she said, the words quiet but carrying the force of a confession. Julian's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. He just waited. "The entire concept for Project Aegis," Elara continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "The sky lattices system, the integrated green energy core, the way the building breathes with the city. That was my work." She looked up, her eyes burning with the unshed tears of 2 years. "We were partners, in business and in life. I developed the entire framework, and he stole it. He stole everything." She was trembling now, but she couldn't stop. He didn't just steal the files. He waited until I'd finalized the stress calculations for the Canton Tower bid. He altered them. He changed my load-bearing numbers by a single decimal point, just one. When the review board ran the simulation, it failed, catastrophically. A complete structural collapse. Her voice broke. He said I'd been reckless, that I'd hidden my mistake, that my arrogance had almost killed people. He used my own reputation for pushing the envelope against me. Julian remained silent, his face a granite mask. He was a statue of pure, calculating stillness. He framed me for a structural failure he engineered, Elara whispered, the final, ugly truth laid bare in the sterile office. He had my license revoked. He destroyed my career, my name, my entire life. He left me with nothing. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm a concierge. I had nowhere else to go. I had to disappear just to survive. And now he's selling my stolen soul to you. Elara's confession ended, and the silence in the penthouse was absolute, heavier than the city skyline. Julian didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at her, his mind clearly spinning, weighing the words of this woman, a concierge he'd fired 20 minutes ago, against the reputation of his star architect, the man responsible for a $5 billion project. He was analyzing risk, credibility, motive. The silence stretched, and Elara felt herself shrinking. He didn't believe her. She was just a hysterical, fired employee. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Julian. Beatrice Thorne stood up from the sofa. She walked slowly, deliberately, not to her son, but to Elara. She placed her hand on Elara's shoulder, the same protective gesture as in the lobby. Her gaze, however, was fixed on her son. I trust this woman, Beatrice said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute conviction. You should too. Julian's face turned to granite. Beatrice's words, her absolute conviction, had sealed his trust. But this was no longer a personal matter, it was business. A $5 billion business built on a potential lie. His analytical mind, the one that built his empire, took over. Gideon? He said, his voice flat, devoid of all previous warmth. He's in conference room B right now. Elara looked up, confused by the sudden shift. He's waiting for me. We were supposed to have the final contract signing for Project Aegis at 10 a.m. Julian glanced at the sleek, minimalist clock on his wall. It was 10:15. He looked back at Elara, his gaze no longer apologetic, but intensely challenging. You said he stole your work. You said he is a fraud, and you are the architect. He took a step toward her, closing the distance. I believe you, but believing isn't enough. Not for this. He walked to the door, opening it to the hallway, and looked back at Elara, who hadn't moved. Show me. Elara's breath caught. Sir? I mean, Julian clarified, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You're coming with me. If he's a fraud, he won't survive 5 minutes in a room with the person he stole from. But if you are exaggerating, if you're anything less than what you claim. He didn't need to finish the threat. The test was clear. Elara stood, her legs shaking, but her spine straightening. 2 years of shame fought with a sudden rising tide of pure cold fury. I'm not exaggerating. Prove it, Julian commanded. The walk from the penthouse elevator to conference room B was the longest 10 yards of Elara's life. It was a silent, agonizing procession. Julian strode beside her, his presence a tidal wave of power, and Elara, in her simple navy blue concierge uniform, felt like a ghost walking beside the god of the machine. Her heart hammered. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was something else. She was ready. Julian didn't knock. He used his executive key card, and the massive, soundproofed oak doors swung open with a whisper. The conference room was vast, dominated by a single 30-foot slab of black marble that served as a table. At the far end, framed by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, sat Gideon Croft. He was alone, a picture of triumphant, relaxed power. The massive, blue-bound contract, hundreds of pages, her life's work was splayed open before him. A gold pen rested in his hand. He looked up when the door opened, his smile of impatience already forming. "Julian, finally. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about our—" The words died in his throat. His smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. He saw Julian, and his expression hardened. And then he saw her. He saw Elara Vance, standing just behind Julian's shoulder in her menial uniform, her eyes burning with a fire he thought he had extinguished 2 years ago. Gideon shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. The sound was a violation in the quiet room. He tried to cover his shock, his professional mask slamming back into place, his hand instinctively straightening his tie. He looked only at Julian, pointedly, desperately, trying to ignore the woman beside him. He sensed the shift in power instantly, the cold, dangerous energy coming from his partner. "Julian?" Gideon said, his voice a strained, tight wire, the false charm cracking. "Is there a problem?" Julian didn't look at Gideon. His eyes, cold and analytical, were fixed on Elara. "Project Aegis," he said, his voice dangerously neutral as he gestured to the massive contract on the table. "The Sky Lattice's design. It's impressive. The core of my entire $5 billion downtown revitalization plan." He walked over to the breathtaking scale model on a side table, a glittering, complex tower that seemed to defy gravity. "Gideon," he continued, "has been walking me through its supposed genius for 6 months. Selling me on every joint and rivet." He then turned, his gaze pinning Elara, who stood in her simple uniform, a ghost in this room of power. "But now I find myself wondering. Elara, why don't you walk us through your thesis on it?" The shift in power was absolute, a tectonic plate sliding into place. Gideon, his face a mottled, furious red, started to speak. "Julian, this is insane. This is irregular. I'm speaking to Miss Vance." Julian cut him off without even glancing at him, his voice like ice. Elara felt the eyes of both men on her, the weight of the city skyline at her back. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but the white-hot fury of 2 years of stolen life was hotter. This was her moment. This was her room. She was no longer Elara the concierge. She was Elara Vance, the architect. She stepped forward, leaving Julian's side and approaching the model, her model. Her hand, shaking only slightly, hovered over the intricate structure. "He's wrong," she said, her voice clear and strong in the dead-silent room. "His version, what he's trying to sell you, it's flawed." Critically, she finally looked Julian in the eye. "The Sky Lattice isn't just an aesthetic, Mr. Thorne. It's the primary load-bearing system. But in his design," she tapped a section of the model's complex outer frame, "he's channeled the lateral wind shear load directly into the K12 joint. He's treating it like a simple compression problem. That joint is reinforced with solid titanium." Gideon blustered, his voice tight. "It's reinforced with metal," Elara shot back, "like a brute, like a first-year student. My design used a dispersed tension cable system, woven through the core. It breathes, it moves with the wind, it redistributes the load, it doesn't fight it. Your version, Gideon," she looked at him, her eyes burning, "will create a harmonic resonance in a 70-mile-per-hour wind. The entire tower will sing itself apart. You didn't understand the physics, you stole the look." Her voice dripped with the contempt of a true creator, "but you didn't understand the soul of it." She then turned back to Julian, her passion eclipsing her fear, her hands now gesturing, explaining, teaching. My design, the real design, solves it. It uses the wind against itself. It's a living building. He built a pretty tomb. He's not just a thief, he's an incompetent one. Ilara's final words, an incompetent one, echoed in the vast, silent room, a gavel slam on Gideon's entire life. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, a vacuum waiting for the verdict. Julian Thorne hadn't moved. He was staring at the model, his gaze tracing the path Ilara had described, then at Ilara herself. His eyes, so recently cold with anger, were now sharp, not just with understanding but with a new, cold respect. He saw it. He understood the physics, the sheer elegance of her solution versus the brute force stupidity of Gideon's. He understood, with chilling certainty, that he had been sold a $5 billion tomb. Gideon, seeing that look of dawning, final comprehension on Julian's face, finally and completely shattered. The professional mask, the smooth charm, the effortless confidence, it all dissolved in an instant, revealing the sniveling, cornered and terrified rat beneath. This is absurd. He finally exploded, his voice a sharp, ugly bark, utterly unlike his usual cultured baritone. He jabbed a shaking finger, not at the model, not at Julian, but at Ilara. You're not actually going to listen to her, are you, Julian? For God's sake, this is a shakedown. It's a pathetic, desperate, insane shakedown. He pivoted, his appeal now directed solely at Julian, his face a mask of pleading, desperate outrage. Julian, think, please, think about who you're listening to. We are partners. We are building a legacy together, the new face of the city, and you're going to let this nothing derail it. He let out a high, strained, terrible laugh, a sound of pure panic. She's a disgraced architect, he spat, the words like venom, his last and only defense. She was disbarred. Her license was revoked by the board for gross incompetence and professional malpractice. She almost got dozens of people killed with her reckless, amateurish mistakes. It's all on public record. Look it up. He gestured wildly at her simple navy blue uniform, his face twisted with a snobbery that was as revealing as it was vicious. And now look at her. Look at what she is. She's a concierge. He said the word concierge as if it were the foulest, most damning epithet in the language, a synonym for failure and filth. She parks cars and gets theater tickets for a living. She fetches coffee, and you're letting her, this servant, stand here and lecture me. Lecture us. On structural integrity? She's clearly hysterical. She's obsessed. She's been stalking me, obviously, festering in her failure for 2 years, trying to find a way to get money after her own career exploded. This is nothing but a sad, vindictive fantasy from a woman who couldn't handle the pressure and blames everyone else for her own mistakes. Me, our old firm, and now you. She's a parasite, Julian, and she's trying to attach herself to your success. You cannot possibly take the word of this person, over me. Over Ethelred Croft, over our contract. Tell her to go back to her little desk and get us some coffee or water. Gideon's final venomous word, water, hung in the sterile, air-conditioned silence. He was panting slightly, his face flushed with self-righteous, desperate rage. He had laid out his case, the successful, proven partner versus the disgraced, hysterical servant. He looked at Julian, his expression a frantic plea for agreement, for the restoration of their sane, wealthy, male-dominated world. Julian Thorne remained perfectly, terrifyingly still. He looked at Gideon, impassive. Then he turned his gaze to Ilara, who was trembling but holding her ground, her eyes burning with a truth that was more powerful than Gideon's volume. Then Julian turned back to Gideon. She is a concierge, Julian said, his voice a flat, neutral statement. Gideon's frantic expression began to morph into a relieved, smug smile. Her license was revoked. Julian continued, ticking off the points. On paper, she's a nobody. Exactly, Julian, Gideon burst out, his voice full of forced, triumphant reason. Exactly. So, let's just get this thing out of here so we can get back to work. Julian held up one hand, and Gideon's mouth snapped shut. But, Julian said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, while you were having your tantrum, my forensics team has been working. He tapped the small, almost invisible earpiece in his ear, a device Ilara hadn't even noticed. The moment Ms. Vance named your firm, I had them break into the Aethelredge Croft archived servers. They are very, very good. They've been digging for the last 20 minutes. Julian reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, sleek, black USB drive. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, and they just sent me this. He tossed the drive onto the massive black marble table. It made a small, pathetic skittering sound as it slid across the perfect polished surface, spinning once before coming to a stop directly in front of Gideon. Gideon stared at the small object as if it were a bomb. What? What is that? That? Julian said, is the smoking gun you were so sure didn't exist. His voice was cold, precise, the voice of a surgeon announcing a time of death. It contains her original, time-stamped, blockchain-verified design files, the real ones. The ones my team just exhumed from a corrupted server partition you thought you'd deleted 2 years ago. He took a step toward the table, placing his hands flat on the marble. They are dated, Gideon. 2 full years before you ever pitched Project Aegis to me. 2.5 years before you filed the patent in your name. He leaned in. It also contains the original structural calculations for the Canton Tower, the ones before your single decimal point correction. It's all here, irrefutable, time-stamped. And now in my possession. Gideon's face, so recently flushed with vicious, defensive rage, went a ghastly, papery white. The color drained from it, not in a wave, but as if a plug had been pulled from his very soul, leaving behind a sallow, terrified mask. He stared at the small, innocuous black USB drive. It sat there on the black marble, a tiny, silent executioner, mocking him. He looked up, his eyes wide and vacant with pure, unadulterated terror, finding Julian's cold, impassive gaze. There was no mercy there, no negotiation, no partner left in the room. He looked at Ilara. She was still standing by the model, her hands clasped, her expression no longer fiery, but just watching, calm, vindicated. She was watching him drown. He had built an entire empire of lies, a $5 billion future, and the foundation had just been vaporized in an instant. The bravado, the bluster, the vicious, spittle-flecked insults about her being a servant, all of it evaporated, leaving a hollow, terrified shell. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. He swallowed, his throat working convulsively. Julian, he finally rasped, the name a weak, pathetic plea. He tried to muster a smile, a businesslike, we're all friends here smile, but it was a grotesque twitch of his upper lip, a rictus of pure panic. Julian, now let's not be hasty. He gestured vaguely at the drive, at Ilara, as if she were a piece of evidence. This is just a misunderstanding. A documentation error. A simple oversight. A he said, she said. He was babbling, his mind, usually so sharp and predatory, now frantically scrambling for a foothold on a sheer cliff of ice. He knew it was over. He knew the data on that drive was irrefutable. Julian hadn't said it was Ilara's copy. He said his forensics team had pulled it from the servers. He had the original, uncorrupted proof, A simple oversight. Julian's voice was a whisper of Arctic air, not even a question, just a statement of pure contempt. Gideon flinched as if struck. He abandoned the lie. There was only one path left, the only one his transactional, amoral mind understood. He leaned forward, pushing the massive, blue-bound contract aside, a desperate, co-conspiring gesture. He tried to lower his voice, as if this was just a private negotiation between equals, as if Ilara wasn't even there. "Julian, please," he begged, the word naked and ugly. Okay. So she contributed. More than I represented. His eyes flicked to Ilara, full of a new, desperate hatred. But think about this. Think about the project. Project Aegis. It's your legacy. It's ours. We can't let this internal dispute derail $5 billion of progress. Think of the investors. Think of the press. Think of the contracts. He was grasping, his hands physically gripping the edge of the marble table, his knuckles white. "We can fix this," he hissed, the words tumbling out, a final, frantic, self-degrading plea. "Julian, we can fix this. We cut her in. Yes, that's it. We bring her on. We give her a title, a payout, whatever she wants, $1 million, $2 million. We make her part of the team. We backdate her contract. We make it right." He was nodding, a manic, puppet-like motion, his eyes wide with a horrifying, desperate logic. He finally turned to Ilara, his smile a terrifying, ingratiating grimace. "Ilara, what do you want? $5 million? Is that it? You can have it. You've made your point. You're brilliant. We all see it. Julian, we cut her in. Everybody wins, right?" This was it. The naked, final, pathetic admission. Not an apology, not a confession of morality, but a simple, sordid financial calculation. He wasn't sorry he stole it. He was just sorry he got caught. He was admitting his guilt not with "I'm sorry," but with "how much?" Gideon's final wheezing offer of $5 million hung in the sterile air, a foul, desperate stench. His question, "Everybody wins, right?" was met with a silence so profound it felt like a judgment. He was still half leaning on the table, a grotesque parody of a negotiator, his smile a rictus of panic, still believing that money was the answer to all things. Julian Thorne looked at him. The billionaire's face was no longer angry, no longer calculating. It was a mask of pure, bottomless contempt. He looked at this man, his partner for 6 months, this visionary he had trusted with his legacy, and saw nothing but a cheap, pathetic thief, a sniveling little man in an expensive suit. Then, very slowly, Julian turned his head and looked at Ilara. She stood by the model of her stolen dream, her hands clasped, her body trembling but her spine like steel. She was a queen in a concierge's uniform. She hadn't asked for $1. She had only demanded the truth. Julian turned back to Gideon. The last ounce of respect or familiarity was gone. He was no longer speaking to a partner. He was addressing a cockroach he had found in his kitchen. "Get out," Julian said. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they carried the absolute finality of a death sentence. Gideon blinked, the smile freezing and cracking on his face. "What? Julian, listen. It's a simple fix. We just need to." I said. Julian repeated, his voice rising just a fraction, just enough to cut. "Get out." He walked over to the massive, blue-bound contract that represented Gideon's entire triumphant future. He placed one hand flat on its cover. "This contract and our partnership is terminated. Effective now. You can't." Gideon shrieked, the last of his composure vaporizing. I'll sue. We have an agreement. I'll take this public." "You'll do nothing," Julian said, his voice a blade of ice. You have committed gross, demonstrable, multi-billion-dollar fraud. You have lied to me. You have lied to my board. You have exposed my company to catastrophic risk. He pointed a single, steady finger toward the door. My legal team, who I assure you are far more ruthless and expensive than yours, will be in touch with your counsel before you even reach the lobby. They will be discussing, among other things, the immediate clawback of your initial design fee, damages for misrepresentation, and a criminal referral for intellectual property theft. He tapped his earpiece. Security, conference room B. We have a trespasser to escort. He looked at Gideon one last time, his eyes as dead and cold as a winter. S.C. Security will escort you from the building. All my buildings. Your access is revoked. Your name is off the project. Your career is over. Now get out. 2 security guards, built like mountains in tailored suits, entered the room with silent, professional menace. They didn't touch Gideon. They didn't have to. They simply flanked him, their presence an iron wall. This way, sir. Gideon, his face a hollow mask of defeat, a ghost in $1,000 suit, didn't say another word. He looked at the contract one last time, his stolen legacy then turned. He didn't look at Alara. He couldn't. He walked out of the room, a broken, defeated man, his future evaporating with every step. The heavy oak door closed with a soft, final click, leaving Alara and Julian alone in the vast, silent room. The only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city, 26 floors below. Alara's legs, which had held her up through sheer, unadulterated adrenaline, finally gave out. She didn't fall, but she staggered, grabbing the edge of the scale her model to keep herself upright. Her hand, so steady when explaining its physics, was now shaking violently. The tears she had refused to shed in front of Gideon now burned, hot and blinding, as the full, crushing weight of the last 2 years and the impossible vindication of the last 2 minutes came crashing down on her. She was free. He was gone. It was over. Julian didn't speak for a long moment. He walked to the window, his back to her, and stared out at the city skyline, at the patch of earth where Project Aegis was supposed to rise. He had just executed his star architect and saved his company from catastrophic failure, all before 11 a.m. He had just seen his own mother, lost and vulnerable, and had almost fired the one person who had helped her. He turned, his face unreadable, and looked at Alara. She was still in her concierge uniform, a stark navy blue symbol of her stolen life, her hand resting on the brilliant, glittering tower that represented her stolen future. The contrast was almost too much to bear. He walked over, not to her, but to the massive, voided, blue-bound contract on the black marble table. He placed one hand on it, then slid it unceremoniously off the table and into a waste receptacle beside it. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "Well," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost matter-of-fact. He then looked directly at Alara, his gaze intense, analytical, and for the first time full of a deep, profound, and hard-won respect. "Ms. Vance." His voice was formal, but the ice was gone. "It appears I have a vacancy." Alara looked up, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, confused. A vacancy, sir." "Yes," Julian said, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He gestured to the model, to the empty chair Gideon had vacated, to the entire city waiting outside the window. "It appears I have a vacancy for lead architect on Project Aegis." 6 months later, the wind didn't just whisper this high up, it roared, a wild, cold song that whipped at the strap of her hard hat. Alara Vance stood on the rising superstructure of the Aegis Tower, 47 stories above the street, on a raw concrete floor that still smelled of curing. Below her, the city sprawled like a complex circuit board, the Onyx Towers Hotel, a tiny, insignificant toy in the far distance. She was dressed in a sharp, slate-gray pantsuit, her steel-toed boots dusty with construction debris. This was her new uniform. She held a tablet, not a guest's itinerary, but the complex, three-dimensional blueprint of her building. She had just finished a tense, productive 10-minute debate with the lead engineer about the specific alloy for the primary tension cables. She hadn't backed down, her knowledge of the material science absolute, and he had finally, respectfully conceded. "You're right, Miss Vance. It's your call. We'll run it your way." This was her life now, a life she had thought was lost forever. The gossip and subsequent news cycle had been a firestorm. The Phoenix Architect, as one glossy design magazine had dubbed her, rising from the ashes of her own betrayal. After Julian's legal team, a pack of legal sharks, had presented the blockchain-verified files to the Architectural Review Board, her license wasn't just reinstated. It was hand-delivered with a formal, groveling public apology. The board, deeply and profoundly embarrassed at having been so thoroughly duped by Gideon, had fast-tracked a full, devastating investigation into Aethelredge Croft. The firm had not survived. It had imploded in a spectacular career-ending scandal. Gideon himself, stripped of his license, his reputation, and his freedom, was now facing a litany of charges, both criminal and civil. He was a broken man, his name now synonymous with fraud, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Elara, on the other hand, was the new, unassailable face of architectural integrity. She had reclaimed her name, her stolen work, and her future. The Aegis Tower, being built on her original, brilliant, breathing design, was already the most talked about and celebrated project on the continent, a symbol of innovation. She tapped the screen of her tablet, reviewing the latest stress test simulations for the sky lattice. They were perfect. The tower wouldn't just resist the wind, as Gideon's clumsy tomb would have. It would dance with it. A foreman, a burly, experienced man named Sal, approached her, holding his own hard hat in his hands out of respect. "Ms. Vance?" The first K-12 joint assembly just arrived from the fabrication plant. It's a thing of beauty, like a piece of a spaceship. The crew is buzzing. "I've been doing this 30 years, never seen anything like it." Elara smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes, a smile that had been absent for more than 2 years. "Good. Tell them to treat it like one. No compromises, Sal. Every tolerance, every bolt." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and the respect in his voice was earned, not demanded. Elara turned back to the view, the wind pulling at her hair. She was no longer hiding, no longer sketching her dreams on napkins in the dark. She was here, in the sun and the wind, building them. She was building them. A gust of wind tore at her, but Elara barely noticed. She heard the familiar, heavy crunch of steel-toed boots on the concrete behind her and didn't flinch. She knew that footstep now. It was as familiar as her own heartbeat. "You'll freeze to death up here if you're not careful," Julian Thorne's voice said, close to her ear. He appeared at her side, a solid, warm presence against the cold. He was also in boots and a hard hat, though his multi-$1,000 suit was still visible beneath his jacket. He held out 2 steaming paper cups. "I figured you'd skip lunch again." "Sal radioed down that you were in the zone." Elara smiled, taking the offered cup, the warmth seeping gratefully into her frozen fingers. "Sal's a worrier. I was just checking the torque reports on the Southern Foundation." Julian smiled back, a genuine expression he now reserved almost exclusively for her. He knew it was a lie. She was just watching her creation, unable to look away. They stood in a comfortable silence for a long moment, shoulder to shoulder, two equals, looking out at the new kingdom rising around them. The view from 47 stories was staggering, a god's-eye perspective of the world they were about to permanently change. Julian sipped his own coffee, his gaze sweeping over the panorama, the park, the silver ribbon of the river, the endless, intricate sprawl of the city they both loved. He turned his gaze from the view to Elara. She was watching the horizon, her face alive with a fierce, brilliant focus and a passion he'd never seen in anyone else. "It's beautiful, Elara," he said, his voice quiet, sincere, almost reverent. He wasn't talking about the view. He was talking about the half-formed skeleton of steel and concrete, the physical manifestation of her genius. It's better than I ever imagined." Elara finally turned to look at him, her chin tilted in that confident way he'd come to admire. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. The wind whipped a strand of dark hair across her face, and she didn't bother to move it. "We're not done yet, Julian," she said, her eyes sparkling with an ambition that finally matched his own. "We're not even close." "I know," Julian said, his voice a low rumble beside her. He set his coffee cup down on a nearby stack of rebar, the movement deliberate. He turned to face her, fully, blocking the biting wind with his own body. The smile, the small professional one, was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, open vulnerability that made Elara's heart stop. "I know we're not close, which is why." "Elara, I have another proposal." Elara's breath caught. "A proposal? For the East Wing? I've already finished the drafts." "No," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she'd never heard from him. "Not for the building." And then, right there, 47 stories above the city, on the raw, dusty concrete, Julian Thorne, the billionaire who owned the sky, got down on one knee. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a velvet box. He just had the cold wind and the city at his feet. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice steady, his gray eyes locked on hers. "For 6 months, I've watched you build this. I've watched you fight engineers. I've watched you inspire a crew of 300, and I've watched you turn steel and concrete into something that's alive. You are the most brilliant, passionate, and terrifyingly competent person I have ever known. You're the only person who has ever told me I'm wrong and meant it." A small, shaky laugh escaped him. "This project, it's a partnership, the best one I've ever had. But it's not enough." He reached up and took her gloved hand, his own warm and strong. "I don't just want a lead architect, Elara. I want a new partnership. A permanent one." Elara's eyes, which had been wide with shock, now filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of a joy so profound, so unexpected, it burned. The wind roared around them, pulling at her hard hat, but she didn't feel it. "Are you asking me to marry you, Julian?" she whispered, the words almost stolen by the wind. "I am," he said, his voice raw. Elara knelt, right there on the concrete with him, her hard hat clinking against his. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." If this story inspired you or made you believe in second chances, please give this video a thumbs up and comment below. It truly helps us create more stories like this for you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring tale. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their true value can't be stolen, and that one act of kindness, even one that costs $20, can change your entire life. Thank you for listening.